Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Teach and Learn in Korea talk experience. Where I said in the previous video, we're going to talk about the First Alleyway. Now, unfortunately, they have closed down due to COVID complications, and it is quite a sad thing, but this video is not about the sadness. It's about the awesomeness that was the First Alleyway. Now, as far as I could tell, the original spot for the First Alleyway was literally if you get dropped off by a bus in a part in Gwangju and you would walk to your left-hand side or whatever, or you walk to in a certain direction, the First Alleyway, you take that and you'll find the restaurant there. It was born from another shop, but it was before my time. But the First Alleyway was basically an expat bar in Gwangju in South Korea, which is freaking amazing. And I don't know how I got. I think the first time I got to the alleyway was the night before Alicon, right? Alicon. And I remember sitting there and just being amazed at this bar because this is the first time I have seen such a bar, right? Let me just see such a bar. It had board games. It had geeky paraphernalia on the wall, like this one, for example, and the other one would be this. Oh, this one. Would be sort of stuff like that. It had geeky paraphernalia on the walls, and I was like, What? Why? How is a bar like this supposed to exist? Remember, I'm from South Africa. At that stage, when I went over to South Korea, this didn't exist in South Africa. Now it's more open to it. Now bars are more open to having board games and everything. But that was like a very niche market. They had an entire bookshelf full of board games and books and stuff that you could read and everything. And I remember sitting there. I think it was after the first Alicon that I was like, okay, I'm sitting there and I'm like, I know that alleyway was my preferred, that would be my bar of choice. And if I'm in Gwangju, no matter what, that would be my bar of choice, the First Alleyway. And I remember, I think it was the second time I was there. I think it was a weekend after Alicon. I was sitting there at the bar talking to, if I remember his name is Mike. I think it's Mike. Talking to him, he was the bartender if Tim wasn't there. But Tim usually was there, but he was the guy behind the bar. Tim was the guy in the kitchen. Tim was the guy sorting out the kitchen stuff. So Mike, I believe his name was Mike, or Mark. Mike. And I'm sitting there, and I remember for a fact that I was sitting there going, okay, looking at the back of the bar, there was a bunch of foreign drinks. So I'm looking through everything, and I believe Mike was gone for a smoke break. And Tim was handling the bar and everything. I'm looking at all the liquor at the back, like there's stuff from America, like hard liquor. It was like your mixes. And I'm looking, and I'm like, at the bottom row of the thing, of the shelves behind the bar, my eye stopped on KWV 10 year. And I looked at it, and I looked at Tim, and I looked at it again, and I looked at Tim, and I looked at it, and I'm like, Tim, could you take that bottle out? The KWV. I want to check something. And he's like, oh yeah, the brandy from South Africa. And he takes it out and he hands it to me, and I'm like, huh? I'm like, can I have a double, please? And Coke. Because that's how I drink brandy in South Africa. That's how most people drink brandy in South Africa. And he looks at me and he's like, are you sure you want a double and Coke? I'm like, yeah. He's like, I'm going to pour you a Canadian double brandy and Coke. I'm like, dude, go ahead. And he's like, it's going to be $10. I'm like, ugh, $10. And immediately my mind went back to South Africa. I'm like, oh, that's 100 Rand for a double brandy and Coke. Roughly. At that stage, it was like 150 Rand for a double brandy and Coke. And I'm like, you know what? I think I need to celebrate South Africa a little bit. And he pours me a double brandy and Coke. And this is what he pours me. But remember, he pours me the double brandy and Coke. And he takes out a 2-liter Coke bottle. And he wants to pour. I'm like, Get me a can of Coke so that I can. Now, it's very blurry because I was a little bit like shaky and happy at this. But you can see basically how big, how much a double brandy and Coke is. That's not a lot of ice. That's like 3 or 4 blocks of ice. But still, that's a lot of brandy. And I started drinking brandy and Coke. What I would do is I would get to Alleyway. After that, I would get to Alleyway and order me at the very least for the entire night. Like, let's say, so how it usually works in Gwangju, how it usually worked, I would get to Gwangju after school. I'd take a shower, get on the bus, get to Gwangju at about, usually depending on my classes, usually, but let's say on average, I get to Gwangju at about 6 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock at night. So I'd get to Gwangju, I'd be in the taxi on my way to the Windmill Hotel. I'd be on my way to a Windmill Motel because from the Windmill Motel, you walk down the street about 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes walk down the street, depending on how busy it is. You turn off in the alleyway and you run into the alleyway. So I'd be at the Windmill Hotel at about 6 at night, 6, 7-ish. And from there, I'd go to the alleyway and I would walk in and they'd like, aha, and they start pouring me the double brandy and Coke after a while. It's like, it's this guy. And I would be drinking that at the alleyway only. That would be my drink. So I would be there for about 2 or 3 drinks of those, and then we'd go out. But this is the story about the First Alleyway in Gwangju, right? And there I've met a lot of cool people. Like I told you, I've met Thomas there. I've met Tim there. Like almost everybody in the alleyway was some form of celebrity or a legend in the Gwangju scene. Like you'd go to the alleyway and you'd find out that the foreigners are performing something for the foreigner group in the local theater area there. Or you would hear that they're organizing a movie night somewhere there. And I mean, when Star Wars, is it Rogue One? Was it Rogue One? Hold on. Was it? No, it wasn't Rogue One. Fuck. Star Wars, the trilogy. Crap. What's it called? Star Wars. I'm gonna Google it now. It was Star Wars: The Force Awakens. How could I forget? And what happened is they organized a screening. I believe it was on the Saturday morning. They organized a screening on the Saturday morning, the First Alleyway. So I got there the Friday night, met up with Thomas and all the legends. So they've organized this. And this was just a bunch of foreigners going in. So you'd pay your money, you paid your tickets, you'd go in, you'd sit down and you'd watch The Force Awakens. So it was my first like Americanized experience of the of watching a movie, in the sense of we sit there and all of a sudden you hear the Star Wars music come up and the credits roll or the scrolly text, like everybody's like, yay! And we're all cheering and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. But anyway, so they'd organize stuff like that. And there's a bunch of legends there. Thomas was one of them. Tim was the other one. Mike was the other one. There was a Jen girl there too. But there was an actual celebrity. The first alleyway, Alleycon thing, the first Alleycon that I went to, I met Ryan Estrada. Now, you guys are like, what the hell? Ryan Estrada. Now, Ryan Estrada is the guy that wrote the comic Learn to Read Korean in 15 Minutes. And I don't think he'd mind that I showed his face, you know. Learn to read Korean in 15 minutes. That's him next to me. We're in the alleyway this Saturday evening. We're chilling out. Or we're in the alleyway at some point. We're chilling out. And I'm like, holy balls, this is the guy. And I've met an actual celebrity along with the other actual celebrities that I've seen in the First Alleyway. Like the local celebrities. He was sort of like a big thing, you know. And I had my first taste. Not only was Tim, the guy from the First Alleyway, responsible for making me the best grilled cheese sandwich ever, but he was also the guy to introduce me to poutine. And he was also Canadian, so he's like, I know how to make this, you know. And like there'd be days where, like on Saturdays, obviously when you don't drink and you're there on the Saturday morning, I'd go to the First Alleyway and have something to eat. And, you know, we'd sit there and we would just talk. We would talk about Tim's favorite YouTube creators. He introduced me to A Dose of Buckley. He would talk about the classic films in his opinion. Like he'd explain to me like some sort of backstory behind Friday and Friday After Next, and or Next Friday, those movies. He'd explain to me like certain things, like because he was sort of he was also a professor at a university there or something, or he still is. So you know he had some insights, and we would sit and talk, and I'd meet Rachel. She was also there. Her husband, their kid. Their kid was a bit too young to remember me, but their kid was also there. Like Rachel and her husband were. Is it Rachel? Yeah, Rachel and her husband were like Korean. Like they've been in Korea for a massively long time. I think like 10 or 13 years before they decided to move. You know, and I was glad to be a part of their Korean experience, and I'm happy they were a part of my Korean experience. And they would talk to me, and like I remember I would sit outside during my last few months, and I remember her husband would sit outside with me and we'd smoke, and I'm like, yeah, this is what's happening currently with my thing. He's like, hey dude, the writing's on the wall, you better, like he said, he doesn't want to bear bad news, but I'd better start saying my goodbyes because chances are I won't be in Korea for much longer. And he spoke the truth, you know. I didn't want to believe it at that stage, but he spoke the truth. And what else happened at the First Alleyway? The First Alleyway. We played a bunch of board games, got drunk on beer, got drunk on... But not drunk as in, oh, we're gonna freaking pass out or whatever. Just got drunk on it. And I remember, like, many of the times in when we were in Gwangju, we would go to the alleyway to start off our night. So at about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, we'd go down to the rest of Gwangju behind. I just call it behind the alleyway, where a bunch of nightclubs are, probably their downtown area. So we'd go there and we'd party until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe even 4. And eventually we make our way back home. And as we make our way back home, you'd see people leave the alleyway as the alleyway is closing. And they'd be all drunk and jolly and happy. And then we'd meet up with them and we'd go sit in a different spot and still like drink our finished morning drinks and see as the nighttime becomes lighter and lighter as the sun begins to rise. And then it's like literally... Sometimes there was one time where I was like, you know what, I'm just going to stay awake, go to my, I was literally, I knew the first bus left at 8. So I stayed awake, like we started talking and everything, and we stopped at like 7 o'clock-ish, and I'm like, you know what, I'm going to get into my hotel, the Windmill Hotel, grab my bags and everything, get a taxi, drive to the bus terminal, and just go home. You know, and this was on a Sunday morning. And that happened multiple times. But the first time it happened, I was like, whoo! And like you would go out this is the big thing. You'd go out in South Korea. This is another big thing. You'd go out in South Korea and you'd leave the club and it's 7 o'clock in the morning. And you're like, what? Or 6 o'clock in the morning. And you're like, what? But yeah, that is generally my alleyway experience. And I really wish they would still be going on. when I returned. But I want to say thank you to Tim, Mike, Jen, Rachel, Thomas, that other guy, man. We hung out. Oh, crap. I can't have my Facebook open because Facebook is having issues, and I would give his name. But I'll probably say thanks to him personally on Facebook once Facebook launches or works again. But they were like a bunch of people in the First Alleyway that I'm probably going to message after this video, just telling them thanks for being a part of my Korean experience. And that was the experience of Alleyway, the First Alleyway. And if you haven't been there ever in your if you've been in Korea and you haven't been to the First Alleyway, you missed out. Let me tell you that. You missed out. But thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.